disputed islands. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing self-determination and the sanctity of sovereignty. Okay, Richard, I don't think anyone denies the Britishness of the people living on those islands, but why should it be their island?
The British government has always felt that it has a not very good claim to the islands, and I'd like to put that directly to Luke, because throughout the history of the islands, the British have been very, very nervous about the Argentine claim. And I went to the islands about 40 years ago with a British minister who was planning at those stages, at the end of empire, the wind-up of empire, to get rid of the islands. And we did get rid of the Chagos Islands, Diego Garcia, at the end of the 1960s, and we handed over the islands to the United States as a military base. At the same time, we tried to persuade the islanders to accept the idea that their future lay with Argentina, just as something like 250,000 British people of British descent, have always lived, or since the 19th century, have lived in Argentina, mainland Argentina.
Okay, Luke, so what makes these islands different then, considering what Richard just said?
Well, technically, Diego Garcia is a British overseas territory as well. It's not part of the U.S., although the U.S. does operate an air base there. But it goes back down to the simple fundamental principle of self-determination. It is true. Richard is correct in saying that these islands have had a complicated history. But the history does show that the British do have sovereign control over these islands, and the people want to keep it that way. You know, there was talk even in the 1970s of doing some sort of leaseback agreement between the UK and Argentina. And in fact, one of the UN resolutions that is constantly touted out by Buenos Aires, UN Resolution 2065 of 1965, actually called for this dispute, this territorial dispute, to be solved peacefully between Argentina and Great Britain. Well, 17 years later, after that UN resolution, Argentina evaded and illegally occupied the islands. And that was a game changer. In 1982, with that Argentine invasion, that was the game changer of the Falkland Islands. And Margaret Thatcher made it very clear after that invasion and after the islands were liberated, that is up to the people to determine their future. Because quite clearly, they want to remain British.
Alex, why doesn't Argentina... Okay, Richard, go ahead. This is Crosstalk. Go ahead.
Why do you argue that it was a game changer? Under international law, the invasion had no impact whatsoever on the basic dispute about sovereignty.
Luke?
Well, under international law, these UN resolutions that are continuously mentioned by Argentina are non-binding. And if they are binding in any sense, they're merely suggesting that the parties involved should settle this dispute peacefully. And as I said, the resolution of 1965, the UN resolution of 1965, that called for a peaceful resolution to the dispute, ended up in a war 17 years later by Argentina invading.
Okay,
so
Alex,
it's clearly...
Alex, jump in. Go ahead.
I think it's important to put some kind of general context, like we have just done with mentioning Diego Garcia and these other islands. There are still a lot of European countries that have overseas territories in the Western Hemisphere, besides the Falkland Islands. You know, you have Bermuda, still part of the UK, where they can decide if they want to be independent or remain or maintain some kind of allegiance to London. You have Curaçao, Nauru, and the former Dutch Antilles, who are part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. You have Martinique and French Guiana, which are over Département d'Outre-mer from France. I mean, and you don't see this kind of debates and even a war that has started over these islands and these regions in the Pacific. Unfortunately, what happened with the Falklands after 1982, after the embarrassing defeat of the Argentine military, was that the claim for the islands became such a part of Argentine national identity that they I mean, whether you can argue that they actually have a valid claim or the British have a stronger claim, but the Argentines believe honestly that the islands belong to them. So nothing, and you have these continuously nationalistic and sometimes aggressive statements by the Argentine government, especially during the Kirchner presidency, that say we're going to have the islands in 20 years, and the British are evil and colonials and that kind of stuff. So, and that definitely doesn't support a situation or negotiations of any kind.
Okay, Richard, it is a big domestic issue in Argentina. Go ahead, Richard.
It is, and I mean, it's rather curious. It's a big issue for the Argentines. It's not a big issue for the British at all. Most of the time, most people in Britain don't give a single moment's thought to the Falkland Islands. The ridiculous thing is that there is a debate about sovereignty. Two countries claim these islands, and they should get together and have a discussion about what might happen. And that is what the British absolutely refuse to do. And I take the side of the Argentines. I think the Argentines are completely right to call for discussions so that this matter can be discussed amicably and peacefully.
Okay, that's fair enough. Luke, you want to respond to that?
There's nothing to discuss here. As far as the UK is concerned, as far as the Falkland Islanders are concerned, this matter is settled. The Falkland Islanders voted overwhelmingly to be part of Great Britain, and we should respect that.
Okay, Alec?
Sure. I'm just going to say that right now, this issue is not going to be solved anytime soon. You have the Argentines are pretty stubborn on their point of view. You have the British have their own point of view. The Falklanders have spoken their mind. But I think it's important to mention, and I know we haven't talked about the oil and the natural resources yet, but I think it's important to mention that cooperation between the two countries over the islands has existed as early as the late 1990s, where both countries signed a number of fishing agreements, the joint search for hydrocarbons and that kind of stuff around the islands. And unfortunately, a lot of these accords have been canceled since. But cooperation between these two countries has existed before, and it should happen again. And I understand that the Falklands, the sovereignty over the islands is going to continue to be an issue of debate and an issue that's going to be very sensitive, especially for the Argentines. Again, obviously, the winners, there's a saying that I guess I'm just about to come up with, that winners get to write history, but the losers hold grudges. Yeah. And I think that's what's going on right now.
Pete.
Okay, Luke, oil was mentioned
I think
okay, let me go to Luke. Oil was mentioned. Is it about oil and fish? Go ahead, Luke. Go ahead.
Well, it's not about oil. That's a very convenient distraction for those who can't build a proper case on why the island should be Argentine. If there is oil there, which many think that there is, there's probably going to be a lot of it. And at the end of the day, this oil is not going to belong to Great Britain. It's going to belong to the Falkland Islands government. So this idea that Britain wants to hold on to the islands for oil is equally ridiculous.
Well, it sounds
I wanted to go back to a quick point that Richard made earlier, that no one in the UK cares about this issue. People certainly care about this issue, and they care even more when we see the sort of campaign of intimidation by Argentina against the Falkland Islanders. When Secretary of State John Kerry went to London and had his first press conference as Secretary of State, the very first question asked by British media was about the U.S. position on the Falkland Islands. Of all the issues going on in the world today, that was the very first question asked by the British media.
Okay, Richard, jump in.
Yes, of course it was, because they knew that they could needle the British, because traditionally the British and the Americans are supposed to be friends. But on this case, the Americans are neutral between Britain and Argentina.
And indeed,
at the start of the Falklands War, Ms. Kirkpatrick, the American delegate at the UN, was decidedly in favor of Argentina. So this has been a sort of open wound.
The US
and indeed, I think one of the purposes of the recent referendum is to use it as a propaganda point in the United States, and I'm sure Luke, that you will be active in that, in trying to persuade the Americans to side with the British and not with Argentina.
All right, Alex, you wanted to say something.
I'm simply trying to persuade Americans to back self-determination.
Let me go to Alex. Go ahead.
I will add that I believe that probably the British media asked that the first question to Secretary of State Kerry, because right now the referendum is the hot topic that's going on right now. It's been going, and the Falklands dispute has warmed up, unfortunately, heated up in the past couple of years, ever since last year in 2012 was the 30th anniversary of the war, which happened in 1982. So it was a very sensitive issue for both sides. Now, to what degree can we say that it's the critical factor in Argentina and for the Argentine media and for the British media and for the British population? You probably want to have a couple of polls about that. I think there are a lot of problems going on in Argentina with its economy that probably take a little bit of precedent, but certainly, like I mentioned before, it's the dispute over the islands is something that's very close to the Argentine national identity. When it comes to the British side, the British have a pretty long history, arguably, or no, at least we can all agree on that, hopefully. And arguably, the Falklands War is not as sensitive as a topic as other issues. It has heated up right now, but it doesn't mean that it's going to continue like this for the long term.
Richard, I'm going to give you the last word in the program. Has anything changed after this referendum? Anything changed on the ground? 20 seconds.
No, I'm afraid nothing has changed at all. I don't think it's a question of self-determination. Of course, Argentina would be keen to accede to the wishes of the islanders to maintain their way of life, but it isn't possible for this to interfere with the need for the British and the Argentines to talk about the future of the islands.